And welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Guys, tonight I wanted to kind of follow up myself and Anthony over at the Knights of Christian, and we did a video that we posted today actually about, the idea of bad liberty versus good liberty kind of a thing, particularly focusing on Glenn Beck. Beck is out there along with the Ben Shapiro types that have been promoting the idea that in America, in order for us to have the good liberties, we have to sort of allow the bad liberties to exist. And, it goes again to what many of us Catholics have talked about for a long time. Can truth and error coexist in civilization? Can good and evil coexist in civilization? To me, that seems like an impossible proposition, considering our fallen nature always plays a role. And I think any other civilization other than this kind of post-enlightenment society that we now live in would have thought that was crazy, that evil has to be rooted out of your civilization or else it will consume you at some point. And so, but these are the ideas that some of the right-wingers are starting to kind of push, because it's kind of that trap they're in, right? Because especially now that we got all these disorders rising in society and nobody wants to fight the cultural battle anymore, right? That's one of the reasons why I left the right wing, is because whenever I brought up all these great surrenders to the great moral issues of our time, I would get a response from many political right. Oh, forget about it, Frank. We've lost on the social issues. Let's just focus on economics, right? And we see how that's worked out, right? Because we have, just as we have, disorder within the culture, disorder now reigns within the political system. They go hand in hand. None of this stuff is, you can't compartmentalize these different issues and how we try to integrate and work out sort of our civilizational issues now. And so in that sense, I mean, when you got a bunch of talk radio hosts on the right now that have surrendered on the social issues and tell you that we have to allow for the bad or allow for evil to coexist with the good principles of civilization, that's nuts. You just welcome Satan to your civilization. I'm sorry. I mean, it's like, like I said, I mean, what are we supposed to do here? Are we Catholics or people of faith in America supposed to go walk arm in arms with the Satanists, the pornographers, and the blasphemers in the name of freedom and liberty? Really? That's what the likes of Beck and Shapiro are now suggesting? Because I think that's a problem. And listen, I think there's something else going on here that I think we've never considered here, right? And that is, we have, and I've noticed this on the right, we have a bunch of talkers on the right that are highly influential within the culture, right? They've got a big mic, they make a lot of money, they make a good living, these guys, and yet a lot of these individuals come from broken homes themselves, which to me presents a problem in some ways. Not that I'm suggesting they don't have any inherent value, but when you have a bunch of individuals that come from broken families and they're preaching against the familial system, all in favor of these bad liberties that we have to allow for, all these disorders in the name of liberty that have to reign, because we can't walk and chew gum at the same time, right? Because in America, because we don't have that moral arbiter of truth, right? We kick the church to the wayside. So now religion, AKA religious liberty, AKA American personal moral codes, becomes a problem in the political sphere when people begin to sort of disagree on moral principles. And because you have no moral arbiter of truth, there's nobody here to really decide fair and foul, right and wrong and good and evil. Effectively, what we've done is we've thrown a lot of these decisions to a secular Supreme Court, which is nothing more than a bunch of political appointees based upon whatever ideology of the day sort of reigns, with the party in power at the time. And we've seen the disaster that has come down the pipe by allowing moral issues to be in the hands of a secular Supreme Court. Basically, everything has collapsed. All moral principles have collapsed over the past 60, 70 years in this country. And that's why I'm suggesting there's a problem here, right? Because when I'm being told as a Catholic, we have to throw the familial system to the wayside because it's tyrannical and it goes against freedom and liberty. And yet I'm looking at these broken individuals on the right who come from broken families themselves. And in many respects, right, they've adopted really the brokenness, the liberal brokenness of the family that really they were governed under. They're simply bringing those same principles, those same ideas of brokenness that existed in their families. They're bringing them to sort of the airwaves of talk radio, and they're influencing millions of Americans. I'm sorry, if you're in the political right, and because you got this quandary of trying to, micromanage this pluralistic society where everybody disagrees on what right is wrong is, and you can't decide for yourself what right and wrong is, the idea that good and evil can coexist in society together, and somehow that's not going to lead to a greater disorder, that's crazy. That's nuts to me. I'm sorry. Look what we're living through now. And this is why I find it just so, I just shake my head, because these guys on the political right, these talkers on the right, on talk radio, have been preaching the same message now. I mean, the rise of talk radio really started with Limbaugh in the mid-'80s. Look where we're at. What has been the end result of talk radio in America? Have they really helped the country become more conservative? I don't think you can make that case. The country has shifted further and further and further to the left. But these guys make a nice living. And they bring, again, their distorters with them to the airwaves when they preach that, okay, we got to allow evil to coexist with truth, essentially. And this is something that nobody's ever sort of held their feet to the fire, I guess you could say, to use a little Catholic historical humor there, I guess you could say. But I'm finding this more and more difficult to take talk radio seriously. In fact, I think as the chaos in the culture and the political system and really the economy now, right? Because we're running so much deficit, inflation is here. I mean, listen, this has all happened under the watch of all these powerful guys on the airways. Now, listen, I'm not gonna leave the left off the hook here. Don't get me wrong. The progressives and the Satanic Democratic Party have done their damage too. But my point is, both sides of those aisles are sort of a liberal ideology that in some respects they work in tandem, right? Because they never allow us to get to true first principles. They've worked in tandem to oust the church. They've worked in tandem to keep the more arbiter truth sort of out of our civilization, and they've worked in tandem to give us a secular civilization. When are these people going to be held accountable for their errors? Again, guys like Beck, guys like Hannity, who's an apostate now, a public apostate, right? Guys like Limbaugh, may God have mercy on his soul. All these talkers, Levin, Shapiro, when will they be held accountable? They've been the big voices on the right. And the country has become vastly more liberal the more they've talked. And I would argue part of the reason is precisely because they've given us these contradicting principles, and they've never decided on any moral truths. I mean, if you ever listen to Beck talk about things like religion, for example, and I have listened to Beck over the years, the man is, how should I put this? He's not too sharp-minded on that issue, let's put it that way. But he loves to talk about God in this abstract way, which is perfectly American, right? We never want to get down to the details when it comes to religion, because we have a bunch of contradictions at the founding of the nation with the founding fathers, right? Because remember, what we've always said here is that, the conservatives always like to claim, well, the founding fathers of America, they were religious men. And so we got to keep some moral principles here. And you hear those quotes oftentimes for the political right, how the Constitution was made for virtuous people and they were Christians, right? Well, okay, stop right there. Stop right there. See, this is the problem. The question with the founding fathers with me is not were they religious men, because Satanists are religious. I said this before. The question is, were the founding fathers orthodox in their faith? And the answer is no. No, they weren't even close. There were some strange beliefs there with the founders. And really, when you listen to the likes of Beck and Hannity and even Limbaugh back in the day before he had his coming to Jesus moment toward the end of his life. Again, God bless his soul. May God show mercy on his soul. But even then, these guys have these kind of abstract ideas of God, these ideas of a general, indifferent God, where if we just say, sing the God Bless America song, he's going to come down and bless us all. There's no true sense of, not only a true sense of religion, but there's no connection to the historical traditions of Christianity, those that connect us to our ancestors. Now, of course, that's a difficult task for the classical liberals because they rebelled against our ancestral roots, right? Rebellion is really the issue they got to deal with. And in many respects, if they rebelled against true religion, there's going to be a guilt complex there at some point. So guys like Beck and guys like Hannity kind of have to make it up as they go. That's what I've seen from the years that I've watched them. All right. Now, if Beck has become more orthodox recently, which I don't think he has, but if he has, then I'll offer my apologies to Mr. Beck. Same with Mr. Hannity, but I know for a fact Hannity became a public apostate about a year and a half ago because I did a show on it with my partner Neil over at the Knights of Christendom. He renounced his Catholic faith and left. Again, and what did he do? He went to this general abstract God of American religious liberty, of American indifferentism, right? He's got his Bible. He reads the Bible every day. He talks to God, right? A God without a definition, a God without dogma, a God without any principles of truth that are tied back to the 2,000-year analogy of the faith, right? You just abandon that. You undercut your own ancestors because you believe you're better than your ancestors, right? Especially a guy like Hannity, who's a Catholic, and I believe of Irish descent. I mean, imagine the great sacrifices his ancestors must have made to pass on that faith. But apparently, Mr. Hannity now knows better than his own ancestors. I talked about the role of ancestral roots and how they're important in my family, right? And how those great sacrifices were made with a faith sort of, on our hearts and in our minds and in our souls, of course, and to reject those willy-nilly in order to accommodate, again, a political narrative of modernity that always heads us to the far left. To me, there's some ungratefulness there, right? So, again, whatever a lot of these talk show hosts suffer from, I'm not going to get into details, all right? Listen, I've listened to these guys on the right for a long time, and I listened to them enough to know that they have disorders in their lives. I'm not going to get into details because I'm not here to slander anybody, okay? But I know that they have many disorders in their lives because when you listen to somebody, these talk shows that have been on the air now 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they reveal a little bit about themselves every day. And what's interesting in America is that oftentimes, because of our indifferentism, we don't even recognize that we're revealing public sin anymore, right? And, for example, let me give you an example, divorce and remarriage. When somebody proclaims on the airwave they've been divorced 2 or 3 or 4 times, whatever it may be, they're revealing their public sins is what they're doing. But because in America, we have liberty and the right to break this contract anytime we want. See, our sensibilities toward toward truth and ultimately virtue have been sort of manipulated in our minds very slowly. Because in America, we interpret divorce as a right to break a contract anytime you want. It's not seen as a historical covenant, a bond that no man can break once God has joined it together. And I would argue this is why divorces have increased. Divorce, along with a lot of other social issues, have played a big role in the detriment and the collapse of the family, especially in America, right? But these subtleties, right? I'll give you an example, shacking up out of wedlock, right? It's normal now. Everybody does it, right? There's no more standards now where we keep a sense of virtue and honesty and purity before we get married now, or just the heck with it. Just live together. Everybody does it now, right? And these kind of little subtle sins, they reveal themselves. And I'm not suggesting all these talk show hosts have done this, but I know enough of them and I listened to enough of them over the years to pick up on these subtleties and these sins that are ultimately a form of disorder. That's why I say when they come to me and say, you Catholics, With your familial system, you're going to have to dump that in the name of liberty. My immediate reaction is, and what am I supposed to do here? My family has never hurt me. I honor my father. I honor my grandfather. I honor my great-grandfather, even though I never knew him, because I understand the sacrifices. The familial system in the old world worked. Families that prayed together stayed together, right? That's a saying we have in America. But families that honored each other in the faith stayed together even longer, for centuries. We have a common understanding of values and faith. And that was Catholicism that sort of consolidated these families together, right? We had a common understanding of values that was very important to keep cohesion within the family. It's only really been under the concept of, again, religious liberty that a lot of these disorders within the realm of Protestantism and, again, American religious indifferentism, that the family has begun to break down. And all you got to do is really look no further than the Protestant nations of the world, to be honest with you, right? And you see this disorder happening right away as soon as Luther and King Henry begin to break away from the church. And they begin to break away. Why? Because of sins below the belt. And that's where sort of the notion of the disordered Protestant family begins. And it really spreads like wildfire really throughout all of Northern Europe after the Protestant Reformation. Right? And you got examples of strong family lineages in Catholic nations, while in Protestant nations, it begins to break down really right away. And that's why I said for a long time, when you look at the full fruition of what the Enlightenment was, it was really the end result of the Protestant Reformation. Because the moment you create this new narrative, this new dogma, this new doctrine called sola fide, where your actions and your sins essentially don't matter, all you got to do is get some kind of a intellectual consent and you've declared yourself going to heaven, you got a problem here. When the founder of your religious ideology says, listen, I can commit adultery 1,000 times a day, but as long as I have faith, I'm saved. You got a problem. When you got a King Henry who's cutting off, his brides or his wives' heads one after the other, if they even were wives. See, that's the irony of it all, right? When he begins to cut their heads off, again, for sexual sin, you got a problem. Luther did it with the nuns, right? Luther had his sexual disorders, and so did King Henry, right? It all begins with that. And so in the Protestant world, you have this devolution of morality that begins with this fake doctrine of sola fide that was concocted out of thin air by Luther, right? And this disorder begins to reign through the Protestant world. And by the time you get to the French Revolution, what is the French Revolution? You got pornography running rampant already in France, right? You got the monarch didn't deal with it probably as best as he should have. But really, you got all these disordered individuals that are non-Catholics pushing for a revolution. You got disorder all over the place. I mean, look what happens to the Dutch and the Netherlands. I mean, it becomes one of the most liberal bastions of the face of the planet through Calvinism, ironically enough. And of course, America being an offshoot of the Puritans, which is Calvinist, we're going down the same path now. That's the irony of it all here. So, it starts at the Protestant Reformation. You break down the discipline, you break down the dogma, you break down the sacraments, you break down the eternal truths of the church. And by the time you get to the French Revolution, you got all kinds of disorders. This is why Naked Lady Liberty is again, the cheerleader or the icon or the symbol of the French Revolution. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I don't think so. The Protestants began the disorder. And by the time you get to the French Revolution, you got a bunch of broken families. And guess who the big targets are? The Catholics, the Catholic nations, right? That are still trying to maintain order. That's why when it came to the French Revolution, right? Not everybody went with the revolution. The Catholics were okay with their monarch. The Catholics were okay with the church, right? It was mainly outside, and lots of Freemasons in there involved. I'm sure there was Protestants involved in there as well, too. Don't get me wrong. But my point is that these concepts of liberty, whether it's the Protestant Reformation, whether it's the French Revolution, or whether it's America today, it's all sin below the belt that's at the core root of a lot of this. Don't get me wrong. You got a lot of pride there, too, right? But again, to have a supposed conservative movement that says to you, oh, we believe in family values, but they promote the very principles that destroy family values. To me, I don't know really what to say, because it's so obvious that you allow evil to fester, right? I mean, Shapiro himself wrote a book on pornography, I think about 10 years ago or something like that. He'll tell you how damaging it is, but he's caught in this political cluster fart about the good liberty was the bad liberty. Well, if we take away the bad liberty, then when they're in power, they're going to take away our good liberties. Well, okay, then what kind of a political system do you have? I understand you're trying to manage the pluralistic culture, but every civilization needs principles of good and evil, right? You have to be able to determine that, or evil will consume you, especially in a nation like America that doesn't even know how to fight the spiritual fight against the demons, because we don't even believe in true religion. We rejected the church. We rejected the sacraments. See, do you see the problem we have here? I'm sorry. I just think to have a bunch of right-wing talkers, and I'm sure it extends to other areas, right? The book writers, the philosophers, things like that, because we're becoming more and more libertarian, essentially, is what we're becoming, at least on the political right is becoming now at this point in history. And of course, with libertarians, everything collapses on the social issues, right? And don't get me talking about subsidiarity. That's garbage. That's garbage. Moral principles start at the top. That's what the church understood. That's what the old world understood. And that's why it worked. It's why the cultures were vibrant, families were strong, and they stayed together, right? Is abortion a byproduct of the old Catholic world? No, it's a byproduct of democracy. Contraception on demand, byproduct of democracy. Disordered marriage, byproduct of democracy. Divorce and remarriage, byproduct of democracy. What else do you have? Go down all the vices, right? Kids out of illegitimacy, byproduct of democracy, right? Shack and Owellock, byproduct of democracy, right? Gluttony, byproduct of democracy. Just name them all. Name them all. It's like I said to you so many times before, America, it takes all the vices of that the church always defined. It takes all the moral sins that our ancestors condemned, and it promotes it, it legalizes it, it funds it, it celebrates it, and it ships it overseas, all in the name of liberty, right? Here we are. The culture's collapsing. The political system's abjectly corrupt. The family's absolutely been decimated. And I got to listen to guys like Beck still pull this crap about, oh, we can't ban the bad liberties because we don't know how to fudge around and keep our good liberties. Is anybody really buying this anymore? Because I'm not. I'm sorry. I'm not buying this anymore. I think this is garbage. I think talk radio, I've been saying this for a while because I listened to it for many years, many decades, right? Talk radio actually does more damage to the political right than it actually does good. There you have it. This is Frank, signing off for Frankly Speaking. Good night, everybody.